to comply with the FAA notice number 6. Now then 11.8 gives you a better understanding of this legal issue, where the AML-CFT requirements in the host country or jurisdiction differ from those in Singapore. Right? Supposing you have a branch somewhere, say in ABC country, right? Or XYZ country, right? And then the financial advisor should require that the overseas branch or subsidiary apply the higher of the two standards. Right? Say Singapore standard is at this level. If you have a branch or subsidiary in ABC country or XYZ country, right, it is expected that the overseas branch or subsidiary apply the higher of the two standards. And of course, again, there's a qualification there to say that to the extent that the law of the host country or jurisdiction so permits. Right? So you cannot insist on the overseas branch or subsidiary to comply with the Singapore standard, which may be a higher standard, and the law or the regulations of ABC country or XYZ country, where the laws in those jurisdictions, in those countries, do not allow the application of the higher Singapore standard. Right? In this case, I think the financial advisor in Singapore, under its group policy, may face a problem. So what do you do? All right? The Singapore higher standard, XYZ country lower standard, and if the financial advisor insists on the branch in the other country to have a higher standard, and he contravene the law of that other country, then how? Right? Right? How? And 13.9 provides you with an answer. So where the law of the host country or jurisdiction conflicts with Singapore law, right? So there's a conflict, overseas country's lower standard, and you want to apply a higher standard, such that the overseas branch or subsidiary is unable to follow, unable to comply, unable to observe the higher standard, then the financial advisor should apply additional appropriate measures to manage the money laundering and terrorism financing risks. Right? As far as the financial advisor concerned, in relation to business relations with customers from the other country, the other jurisdiction, then insofar as the head office in Singapore is concerned, the financial advisor is required to apply additional appropriate measures to manage and monitor the risk of AML and CFT. And importantly, you must report this to the MAS. Right? So MAS must know that, hey, look, my branch, my subsidiary in ABC country cannot comply with the higher standard, right? Because it conflicts with the law and regulation of that country. Right? So apart from the additional appropriate measures that you need to implement, you need to inform the MAS, you need to report to the MAS, and the MAS may issue further instructions or directions to you as to how best to manage and mitigate such risk of money laundering and terrorism financing. All right, so that's 13.9. Right, then moving down, then compliance. Well, that's obvious. As a financial advisor, you shall develop appropriate finance management requirements, including at least, underline this, the appointment of an AML-CFT compliance officer at the management level. Right? So underline the word management level, which means to say that this particular department, right, that manages money laundering and terrorist financing must be at a senior management level, right? As I said before, generally it will be probably the head of risk management or the head of legal and compliance. Right? So sufficiently high level to be able to get things done. Right? And 13.11 is very clear. This is a notice provision, which means that it must be complied with. And it's very clear there. A financial advisor shall ensure that the AML-CFT compliance officer, as well as any other persons appointed to assist him, meaning to say this person's department, is suitably qualified, right? Suitably qualified, and has adequate resources and timely access to all customer records and other relevant information which he or she requires to discharge his or her function. All right, so this is quite clear. You have to have a big department if it's a big company. All right, so a big financial advisor, depending on the nature and the amount of business and so on. So you must have an adequate department, suitably qualified people, resources, and timely access, right? In order to perform the function to monitor and to mitigate risks relating to money laundering and terrorism financing. Okay, so this is in relation, okay, to the arrangement that a financial advisor must have, right, to do this particular, to perform this particular function. Now, looking at the 13.12, that's the audit, right? Not only must you maintain a suitably qualified department to do the monitoring and the mitigating of money laundering, you also must have an audit department, an audit function. Right? Similarly, this audit function, internal audit function, must be adequately resourced. Again, the same story, right? Suitable people, pay them suitably well, and so on, so that they can discharge the function. And importantly, in this case, independent, right? So same as the compliance officer, so this audit officer must also be independent of the sales people, right? To be able regularly to assess the effectiveness of the financial advisor's internal policies, procedures, and controls, and whether it complies with the regulatory requirements. All right? So you have a compliance function, you have an audit function. Right? So these two are important in order to fully comply with this provision, the provisions in this notice. Right? Then 13.13 is also a shall thing, it's a mandatory thing. A financial advisor shall have in place screening procedures, right, to ensure high standards when hiring employees, appointing officers and representatives, right? So the government and MAS in particular is very concerned about money laundering and terrorism financing. So in terms of hiring employees and agents and representatives, so the provisions in this notice say that you must make sure that you have the proper screening procedures, right? To make sure that, the people that you hire are of sufficient quality, as it were, in terms of being fit and proper, right? To be employees or representatives of the financial advisor corporation, right? Then the last bit there is training under 13.4. Again, it is a mandatory thing. You shall take all appropriate steps. The financial advisor shall take appropriate steps to ensure. You see, the words used are very, very strong, right? Shall and ensure, right? So there are no two ways about it, right? There's employees, officers, and representatives, whether in Singapore or elsewhere, are regularly and appropriately trained. Right? So that's the mandatory requirement for the financial advisor to train all its staff, all right, on AML, CFT laws and regulations, and in particular, CDD measures, right? What are the customer due diligence measures that must be done, all right, when you establish a business relation with a customer or you engage in any financial transactions under the Financial Advisors Act, right? So all your employees must be trained. And B, say prevailing techniques, methods, and trends in money laundering and terrorism financing. Right? That's why the training must be regular, at least once a year or once in 2 years, maybe the longest, right? Because the techniques, methods, and trends used by the criminal groups, right? Used by money launderers and people who finance terrorism. These methods, these techniques do change over time. All right. You can see that actually from the FATF website or from the Interpol, right? So the FATF and the Interpol have regularly put up notices and advertisements and cautionary notes in order to inform the world in general, as it were, the trends, the methods, and the techniques, right, that criminal groups use to launder money, right? Or to launder money for terrorist purposes. So the financial advisor is required actually to keep tab of these changes. And that's why regular training is required. And the financial advisor's internal policies, procedures, and controls, etc., on the AML CFT in relation to the roles of the employees, officers, and representatives in combating money laundering and terrorism financing. Right? Right, to sum it up, therefore, training is essential, right? In order to ensure that all the staff of the financial advisor are properly trained, right, to be able to recognize business relations, financial transactions that may be, right, related with money laundering or terrorism financing. This is the only way in which these activities, these criminal activities, can be detected and reported on. Right, so that completes the notice, the FA notice number 6. Now, as I told you earlier in chapter 2, if I believe, that an act of parliament is difficult to read because of the nature of the document and the way it is being written, right? Right? That is the legislation. For example, the CDSA, the Corruption, Drug Trafficking, and Serious Offences Act, or the Terrorism Suppression of Financing Act, the Suppression of Terrorism Financing Act. So acts of parliament are difficult to read, in which case then they give you notices, which we have just gone through, like in this case, the FAA notice number 6. Right? The notice provisions are relatively easier to read, but they are relatively concise, right? So sometimes it's difficult for lay people to fully understand what it means by money laundering, what it means by terrorism financing. So this particular section 4 or paragraph 4 under this particular chapter 6 is important. You will see under paragraph 14, guidelines to MAS notice number FAA number 6 on prevention of money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism. Now, this is a guideline, right? As I told you earlier in chapter 2, guidelines generally do not have the force of law. But there are consequences, right, if the guidelines are not followed. So if you look at this particular guideline, right, which is given pursuant to the MAS notice FA number 6, then you will notice the details, right, the greater details that they provide for guidance, so that financial advisor representatives and the officers of the financial advisor can better understand how to comply with the notice. All right? So it gives you more meat, as I've said earlier, for you to better understand and to comply with the provisions in the notice and with the provisions in the statute, the Act of Parliament itself. All right. So now let us take a bit of time and go a bit slower on this particular thing. As I've indicated to you, this issue on money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism, this topic is very serious, right? The penalties are very high, right? So if a person were to be charged with money laundering crime, the penalty can be up to $500,000 and a jail term of not less than 10 years. All right. So this is a very serious provision, and one has to be very careful about that one. Right? If you look at the penalty itself, it says a lot, right? And I'm sure some of you may have read in the newspapers, right, about even relatively, how shall I put it, relatively in inverted commas, so-called innocent parties, right? So they may be actually be scanned into helping money launderers, right? And as a result of which they can be jailed up to maybe 6 months, 12 months, right? Minimally, and a heavy fine. Now, this is called the money mules. I'm sure you must have read about some of this in the newspapers, right? Okay, now without further ado on that one, let's take a look at the guideline, right? The guidelines pursuant to this notice of FA number 6. Now, just look at paragraph 1, the introduction there, right? So it applies to licensed financial advisors, right? This guideline, right, on the money laundering and terrorism financing apply to licensed financial advisors under 1.1a and 1.1b registered insurance brokers, right, which are exempt from you can read for yourself, and also 1.1c, okay? Now, you'll notice that exempt financial advisors are not covered by this particular notice of guideline. This is simply because if you are talking about, say, for example, the banks, right? So the banks have their own notice provision. The banks are not governed by FA notice number 6. The banks are covered by, if I can recall, MAS notice 626, right? So a bank is an exempt financial advisor, right? So a bank registered under the Banking Act is a financial advisor. And as such, banks are governed by the MAS notice 626, right? And not FAA number 6, right? So therefore, exempt financial advisors do not need to be concerned with FAA notice number 6. Right? Similarly, if you are talking about the Securities Act, they have the SFA 0402. And if you're talking about money changes business, then there's a MAS notice of 3001. All right. Now, even for myself as a practicing lawyer, I'm also subject to this money laundering rules. And there is a notice in relation to legal practitioners, all right, to help prevent money laundering and terrorism financing. Okay, so these are cross industries, and relevant notices and guidelines are being issued. Right. So insofar as financial advisors are concerned, you need to comply with the notice FA number 6, and to ensure best practices to follow this particular guideline. Right. Now, very quickly, let's move down to 1.4. Right. This is some of the greater details that I was talking about. So they give you a definition of what is money laundering. Right. You will see that in the notice provision, the notice provisions there do not provide for a definition. So what does money laundering actually mean? Right. So it's clear at 1.4.1. There is a process intended to mask the benefits derived from criminal conduct, so that they appear to have originated from a legitimate source. Right? So 1.1.4 there provides also the primary legislation to combat ML, which you know about already. There's a CDSA. Alright? And the 1.14 provided the guideline to say that you should refer to the Commercial Affairs Department website for this information. Right, so we have referred to CAD, we have referred to STRO, which are essentially the same, right? The STRO is a Suspicious Transaction Office, which is part of the CAD, Singapore Police Department. Okay. Then you look at 1.4.2, here they give you greater details and say, hey, look, yeah, we give you a definition of What is money laundering? It's a process, right? It's a process to disguise money from criminal conduct, whether it's corruption, drug trafficking, or serious offenses. Right? So there's a process involved. So what are the steps in this process? So 1.4.2 give you the 3 steps, which are placement, layering, and integration. So the 3 steps are placement, layering, integration. Now, if you look at placement, it is the physical or financial disposal of benefits derived from criminal conduct. Now, here it means that the criminal group, all right, or the criminal, whoever that's trying to launder money or finance terrorism, they have dirty money, whether from corruption or from drug trafficking or other serious offenses. They need to place out this dirty money. All right, I'm sure some of you may have read about all the juicy newspapers report about Chinese officers in Greater China regarding how they collect money. They collect money from everyone that they can get their hands on. For example, there was one incident actually where it was reported that this corrupt official actually has a lot of money in his house. All right, they do not know the source of where the money comes from, but when it was discovered, they required about 5 armored trucks to carry the cash from his house. Right? So there are many examples which I think you can read from the media relating to how people or how corrupt politicians or corrupt military officers or corrupt judicial officers, all right, so they get money from illegitimate means, illegal means, and as a result of which they need to launder the money, right? They need to place out the money. So this is the first step in the process of placing out, right? They need to put the money out in the market. So what do? Well, they make use of financial institutions, they make use of housing agents, they make use of car salesmen, they make use of lawyers, they make use of everybody else they can find, right? They need to place out money. Right? Let me give you an example in terms of conveyancing, right? A lawyer, for example. So if a guy comes to a lawyer and says, look, I want to buy a property that is $7 million or $10 million, right? A very luxurious condominium, right? And this particular customer says, I do not need a bank loan. I want to pay cash for this purchase. Right? Now, automatically, this lawyer or this conveyancer will sit up and say, hey, where is your source of fund? Where's your source of wealth? Where do you get $7 million to pay cash on this luxurious condominium? All right. So you have to, it is a suspicious transaction as such. All right. So is this particular person, this customer in front of you trying to place out illegal money, place out dirty money? So that's a question you need to ask, right? In terms of a car salesperson, right? This guy goes to a car salesperson and says, hey, I want to buy this particular Ferrari or Lamborghini, right? This Lamborghini, Ferrari, maybe $3-4 million, right? And this customer says, I want to pay in cash, no loans required, right? So again, this car salesperson will have to sit up and say, hey, look, hey, this is big money, $3-4 million for a car. Right. So again, the same question has to be asked. What is the source of funds? What is the source of wealth to enable this customer to be able to afford to pay cash for a $3 million car? Right. So I think you get the drift of what I'm talking about. Like even for insurance companies, right? If a customer comes and buy a big universal life policy from you, all right, say a 10 million, 20 million, 30 million life insurance policy for you. Right? Or even for that matter, $100 million policy from you, right? And this person tells you, I want to pay cash, right, for the premium. Right? So, and after that, within the 14-day period, they say, okay, look, I do not want to buy the policy, right? And then you got to return them the money. So there's placement. This is the meaning of placing out the money. All right. So the free look provision, the 14-day free look provision under an insurance policy may be an avenue for money launderers to launder money. Similarly, for people who go and buy shares, right? To buy shares from a stockbroking house, right? I pay cash for some shares, 2-3 days later, a week later, I sell the shares, right? Whether I make money or I do not make money does not really matter. What I get back is a share broking firm's check, all right, which I can put in the bank and for good account. Right? So there are many ways in which the money launderers can place out the illegal funds. Right? So that's the meaning of placement. Right? Right? People can use antique shops, people can use anything. Right? So like I said before, the trends, the techniques do change over time. The last time I looked in the United States, they are using paintings, artwork, as a source of, as a method of laundering money. Okay? So this placement is the most important part of the 3-step process, right? So if the money launderers, if the criminals cannot place out the money, there's no way money laundering can take place. So placement is key, right? Right? Same for money changers, for that matter, right? So a money launderer actually can go around the whole of Singapore changing small amounts of money. All right. So a relevant transaction in terms of money changing maybe $5,000 and below. So if I come to Singapore, we say 20,000. For example, I'm a foreigner. I come to Singapore, we say 20,000, 25,000 equivalent of Singapore dollars. All right. There's no need for me to declare the immigration because it's below $30,000 or $1,000 or below whatever amount that the government set from time to time. All right. Let's say 30,000 the limit. I bring in 20,000 in cash. All right. So I go around the whole of Singapore changing money, say below 5,000. So I'm actually laundering money. Right. And if I'm a corrupt politician in ABC country, all right, I can fund 20 students, right, or 20 persons to come into Singapore, each one carrying 25,000 Singapore dollars worth. And these people can go to the whole of Singapore changing money into US dollars, into Sing dollars, into whatever dollars. And that becomes clean money. All right. And then I deposit this money in small amounts into banks, opening accounts. So that's what I'm trying to tell you in terms of placement. Right? The techniques and methods that money launderers use are almost infinite, right? They are very innovative, they are very creative in terms of placing out money. Okay, so that's the first part. Now the second part, the second step in the process is layering. Right? So once they have placed out the money, all right, then they will layer it, meaning to say they will keep on doing similar events, similar happenings, right? The separation of these benefits from the original source by creating certain layers, right? By creating certain layers of financial transactions in order to disguise the ultimate source and transfer of these benefits, right? So they're prepared to keep on avenue to another, right? And then they keep on putting up layers, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers. So by the time you come to the 6th or the 10th layer, whatever layer, then the money is disguised, right? You can't trace the source. All right? It goes to a buying of a car or a house or a painting and so on. So end of the day, there's so many layers that it is very difficult to trace the source. All right? In other words, that becomes almost clean money, as it were. All right. Now, the last step, of course, is integration. All right. So, the provision of apparent legitimacy to the benefits derived from the criminal conduct. Right. So now you give a lot of transparency. Right. The money has already been cleaned. Now, if the layering process succeeds, right, it goes on from 2, 3 layers or whatever number of layers that are required. The integration schemes place the laundered funds back into the economy so that they re-enter the system appearing to be legitimate funds. Right? So once the money has been laundered, right, then this money will be used, all right, to buy, for example, shares in a company, to start a new company, and so on. Right? So the funds becomes legitimate, become clean. Right? There are instances actually in Eastern Europe. If you look at the Interpol reports, and some of this laundered money, right, after being placed out, after being layered, they came back into the country, and these money launderers, these criminal groups, Actually, they buy small banks and small broking houses and buy small businesses. Right? So they become legitimate, right? So that is the three-step process. I just repeat: placement, layering, and integration. Right? Right. So the question is, which is the most important step? As I have alluded earlier, placement is number one, right? If they cannot place out the money, they cannot layer. If they cannot layer, then definitely they cannot integrate, right? So take note of this three-step process, right? And make sure that the criminal groups do not make use of the financial advisor corporations in Singapore to launder money in that regard. Okay, right. Now, then following down the paragraph there, the guideline also gives you a definition on terrorism financing. Again, this I have talked a little bit about earlier. Right? So what are acts of terrorism? Right? So acts of terrorism seek to influence or compel governments, all right, into a particular course of action, or to intimidate the public or a section of the public. So that's the definition. All right. So if you look at the Hong Kong riots in the last year or the last few months, so that there are talks that the riots in Hong Kong therefore may be acts of terrorism, right? So you're intimidating, you're trying to compel the government to change a course of action or to intimidate the public. So then what amounts to terrorism financing, right? So any act that influence or compel governments, right, into a particular course of action is defined as terrorism, right? And any act that intimidate, frighten, right, the public, coerce the public into doing something, or a section of the public, is defined as terrorism, right? So again, I will refer you to the act itself and also to the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Measures Regulations number 1. All right. So these are the two authoritative definitions of the meaning of terrorism, right? So terrorism is being defined under those sections in the two statutes, right? Now 1.4.4, terrorists require funds to carry out acts of terrorism, like 9/11. I think we all know about 9/11, right? There's a lot of money involved in committing the 9/11 atrocities, right? It is not a simple thing. It's a lot of money must have been involved, right, in mounting the 9/11 attacks, right? And terrorism financing is the act of providing these funds. So where do the monies come from for any terrorist activities, right? The monies must have come from somewhere, right? Such funds may be derived from criminal activities, right? Robbery, kidnapping, drug trafficking, extortion, corruption, bribery, kickbacks, fraud, right, or hacking of online accounts. This becomes quite prevalent nowadays, all right, where criminal hackers actually hack the accounts of corporations for money, or even hack into the accounts to collect their data and then bribe and compel them to pay for the return of data or information. So all these are illegal activities, right? And in such cases, there may be an element of money laundering involved to disguise the source of funds, right? So the money came from illegal activities, criminal activities, and therefore they are dirty money, and therefore they need to launder them, right, before they can be integrated, right, and fund all these terrorist activities. Well, 1.4.5 has a qualification there. They say that terrorist acts and organizations may also be financed from legitimate sources. All right. Sometimes the criminal groups or the terrorist groups, they put up legitimate businesses, right, such as charities, right? So they run big charities as a front. Sometimes they even run legitimate business operations, right? And when they run, for example, printing companies, advertising companies, and so forth, and in which case the funds may be legitimate, and they use this money to fund terrorist activities. Now, important for you to note, as stated at 1.4.5, right, that terrorists need not always involve large sums of money, right? So they're careful to disguise that technique, right? Terrorism financing can be hard to detect, and financial advisors should remain vigilant. Now, I'm sure, again, you have read in the newspapers in Singapore that certain individuals actually contributed small sums of money, right, to ISIS, right, to certain known terrorist groups, right, and these people have been found and they have been charged in court. Now, these are small contributions, right? So they are sympathetic to the terrorist cause and they contribute their monthly salary, part of the monthly salary or whatever money they can get their hands on, and they contribute to these terrorist organizations to help finance terrorism, right? So it's not always the case that huge amounts of money are involved, okay? It's very difficult to detect, as has been stated there. So therefore, financial advisors and the financial advisor representative should remain very vigilant, right? Okay, so that is in terms of the scope and the nature of terrorism financing that one has to be careful about. Okay. Now, moving down the line, we have the 3 lines of defense. Right? Now, you'll notice that this does not appear in the notice nor in the act. Right? It comes in the guideline. Right. Now, what are the 3 lines of defenses, right, that we are required to take note of and to follow? Now, 1.4.7 says very categorically, and you are reminded, that the ultimate responsibility and accountability, right, for ensuring compliance with the anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism laws, regulations, and notices, laws, the statute, regulations, and notices rest with its board of directors and senior management. All right. Now, that doesn't mean that you, as a financial advisor representative, there's no need for you to worry about. The answer is no. You have to, right? Because any penalties that may be engaged will be on natural persons, right? So in this particular case, the board of directors and senior management is the first line of defense, right? So 1.4.8 gives you the details, right? While certain responsibilities, the second line I'll read to you, while certain responsibilities can be delegated to senior AML CFT employees, final accountability rests with the financial advisors, board of directors, and senior management. So this first line of defense is the financial advisor should ensure a strong compliance culture throughout its organization. All right, where the board of directors and the senior management set the right tone. All right, so this is the first line of defense. The board of directors, senior management, right? Set up a clear risk appetite and ensure a compliance culture where financial crime is never acceptable. Right? Financial crime is never acceptable. So that's the first line of defense. Right? Now, that's the reason why, in terms of granting of financial advisor's license, the MAS makes very sure, right, that the board of directors, right, members of the senior management are fit and proper persons. Right? Each and every director, right, must be certified as a fit and proper person. Right? Otherwise, these people will not be appointed as a director to sit on the board of directors, or to be appointed as a senior management staff, right? Whereas as a managing director or executive director, or any director, even an independent director. Right? So these people must be fit and proper, right? Under the law on money laundering and anti financing of terrorism law, The culture must be set by the board. Okay, so that's the first line of the important thing is there. Okay, so the board is important. Now, number two, the business units, right? So business units, mainly the front office, the customer-facing function, right? All right, so these are the people, this is the first line of defense. The board is a key. The first line of defense is the customers facing functions. So who are the people facing the customers, right? The customer-facing functions, meaning the sales staff, people who talk to the customers, people who are in charge of opening accounts and things like that, right? All right, so people in the front line, they have this duty or function of identifying, assessing the risks of the business, right? So that's a frontline people, right? So that is very clear. So the board, and I'll repeat that and make sure that we are on the same page. So the board and senior management are key, right, to set the proper culture, to set the proper tone on this particular topic. And this must be cascading down the line. I must repeat, it's cascading down the line. It cascades downwards to make sure first the front office people, the sales staff in particular, the sales representative, the financial advisor representative in particular, because these are the guys that face the people, face the customer who opens an account. These are the people who prospects for customers. Okay, so these people must know the ins and outs of money laundering and the financing of terrorism. Okay, so if you look at 1.4.10, I read to you very quickly here. As part of the first line of defense, business units require robust controls to detect illegal or illicit activities, right? And they should be allocated sufficient resources to perform the function effectively. Right? The financial advisor's policies, procedures, and controls, etc., must be clearly specified in writing and communicated to all relevant employees, officers, and representatives in the business units. Right? Right? And so that's the first part, right? So when you come on board the financial advisor corporation to work, so the initiation process, the financial advisor's duty to talk to you about money laundering or transaction financing. All right, so you got to go through the introductory stage. So therefore, there's a need to inform you, probably in the handbook, or other documents. All right, in which you are informed of the financial advisor's policies and procedures and controls. Right, that's the first one. Then the second point is the financial advisor should adequately train employees, right, officers and representatives, right, so that you have the necessary knowledge and expertise in order to be able to identify and to conduct the relevant due diligence measures, right? So the key is the due diligence measures. So you must able to, the financial advisor must know these things and able to conduct such measures. And of course to be aware of all the laws and regulations and notices. Right? So that is in terms of the first line of defense. Alright, so the front line stuff. Okay? Right? So there are two levels in which you can do it. Right? One is to ensure that when you come on board, right, they brief you on that one and they give you all the relevant documents and policies and so forth, so you can read about them and understand them. And secondly, go for training, right, to ensure that you know the techniques and the methods and the trends of money laundering, and also to be in the know about the laws and regulations and notices governing this topic. So that's the first line of defense, right? The frontline people. All right. So from the board and the senior management, it cascades down to the frontline people, Then it goes into the second line of defense, and this is the compliance function. All right. So the compliance function is important as it monitors ongoing. It monitors the ongoing or the fulfillment or otherwise, the compliance or otherwise of AML CFT duties by the financial advisor. Okay. So second line of defense is the compliance function. This means sample testing, all right, review of exception reports, right, and this function by the compliance unit, right, is important because they will alert senior management if it believes that the employees or the officers in the line department, in the front line department, are failing or having failed to adequately address the money laundering or terrorism financing risks and concerns. Okay. In other words, the compliance function is to act as a checker. All right. So you look at all the exception reports, you look at all the transaction reports, all right, on an ongoing basis, and see that whether there's any failure, all right, or oversight of the frontline people, right, in complying with the ML and TF rules and regulations. Okay, so that's the second line of defense in terms of the compliance function, the compliance unit. Now, of course, in this particular 1.4.11, it also states that other support functions must also chip in this ongoing monitoring, whether or not the frontline staff has done their job properly, as it were, right? So these other support functions include operations, right? The operations department also has a duty to say, hey, look, the frontline staff, the frontline employees, for example, yourself, financial advisor representatives, are you doing properly? Are you complying effectively with the rules and regulations governing this topic? Okay? So the operations department has to take a look at it. The human resources department also has to take a look at it, right? And importantly now, as we go fully computerized or digitized, the technology department. Now, as far as I know, there's one big financial organization that's put a lot of money into this technology. All right, so they are looking at cyber money laundering, cyber terrorism financing, right? I mean, as well as I know, this particular institution, big money has been spent to put up this technology-based monitoring of money laundering and terrorism financing. Okay. So the technology department, the operations department, all these departments have a part to play, right, in support of the compliance function, right, to make sure that issues of domestic or foreign attempts to finance, to launder money, or to help finance terrorism activities are being clearly identified and reported on, and so that the enforcement can take place, right? So let me just backtrack a bit. So the board of directors and senior management set the culture and the tone. Then it cascades downwards to the frontline staff, the people actually doing the work, talking to the customers, opening accounts, establishing business relationships, and so on. Then it moved down to the back room, and these are the compliance function, right? These are the inspectors or the checkers, right, to make sure the frontline staff comply with the requirements. Okay, and then the third line of defense at 1.4.12, and I read to you, at the third line of defense, the financial advisor's internal audit function or an equivalent functions play an important role in independently evaluating the risk management framework and controls for the purpose of reporting to the audit committee or the financial advisor's board of directors or a similar oversight body. Now let me explain this. Now in the financial advisor corporation, right, normally you've got few committees, especially when you're talking about public listed company. All right, if the financial advisor is a public listed company, all right, so normally you have the board of directors, All right. And from the board of directors, you have what we call an audit committee. All right. So the audit committee is an internal audit. All right. That looks at all the relevant business transactions of the company, including AML and the CFT. Right. So this audit committee is an important committee. Right. And normally, as far as I know, they meet at least once a quarter. At least once a quarter. All right, to look at exceptional reports, to look at issues regarding AML and CFT, among many other issues, of course, right? So that's the role of an audit committee, right? It must be staffed by suitably qualified people, experienced people and so on, right? To be able to conduct the appropriate audit, right? Now, if there's no audit committee in a particular financial advisor, then the financial advisor has to set up a similar oversight body, right? Right. So this is audit. And then this is an independent evaluation, right? It must be independent. Right? So the audit committee will look at the terms of reference, all right? The terms of reference governing AML and CFT, and then to oversee, to check, all right, whether the compliance has been properly done and who has failed in the process, right? In not complying with the notice or following the guidelines. All right, so that's a third line of defense in terms of audit. All right, now here we are referring to internal audit. Now, as far as I know, again, and usually when you have a listed company or financial institution, you also have an external audit, right? And the external audit under the scope of duty or the terms of reference in engaging an external audit. Part of the scope of their duty will be, again, to have oversight of the AML and CFT compliance requirements, right? So there are many levels in a financial advisor in order to help mitigate the risk regarding AML and CFT. All right, so those are the three lines of defense that are provided for in this set of guidelines in order to carry out the functions of preventing money laundering and terrorism financing. All right, so I just want to cover a little bit on the next part, governance. All right, 1.413. And I just want to emphasize this point to you. Strong board and senior management leadership is indispensable, underline that word, indispensable, in this oversight, right, of the development and implementation of a sound risk management framework across the financial advisor. Right? So that is the key point there. The rest, I believe you can read it for yourself. And the other bit I want to emphasize is, of course, a risk-based approach. Right? I must emphasize this point. The guideline here has provided, and as I've repeated often enough, the approach to AML and CFT is risk-based. Right? It is not prescriptive. Right? The MS doesn't tell you what to do. All right? It doesn't prescribe any thing to you. What MAS says is, well, this is risk-based, right? You make sure that you do the proper thing, following the notice provisions and following the guideline, right? Effective operation of a risk-based approach, right, depends on the board, the senior management, the employees, the officers, the representatives, having a very good understanding, right, of the risk inherent in the financial advisor's business. Right? So you're doing whether life insurance or capital market products or foreign exchange or whatever, derivatives and so on, right? Life insurance, investment-linked policies, whatever, all right? So the nature of your business, there are inherent risks, right? Where criminal groups do try to make use of in order to launder money. So therefore, the approach that the authority or the MAS is going to take is risk-based. All right? To make it very simple, the ball is in your court, in the financial advisor's court. All right? So you have to do whatever is necessary to make sure you comply and follow the guidelines as set out for you. Okay. Right. So 1.4.14, I think that's self-explanatory, right?